What's real and what's unreal? In my last video about the cruelty of non-duality, I said I would address this question, what's ultimately real and unreal, but I decided that it would make the previous video too long, so I will do it in this video. And it's of course a question that has been debated by philosophers, scientists, theologians, political agitators for a very long time. So I think we could start with a less ambitious approach, a more practical approach. So let's look at our situation. I'm not talking about most people in the world, but I'm talking about us who are aware that there is a spiritual side to life. So most of us, we grew up in a non-spiritual environment. It might have been a materialistic environment that was against religion. It might have been a religious environment, but religion tells us what to believe. And incidentally, scientific materialism does the same. It tells us what to believe based on what authority figures tell us. But we who are spiritual people, we can't be satisfied with that approach. It's just not enough for us to believe what somebody else tells us. We want to understand ourselves. We want to have intuitive experiences that shows us what's real and unreal. That's why we're open to a spiritual teaching. But what happens to most of us is that we find a spiritual teaching, a spiritual guru, a spiritual movement, we join that, and they have some kind of worldview where they tell us this is how the world works, this is how the spiritual realm works, and therefore they in a sense define for us what's real and unreal. And this can be very helpful for a while. I mean, I was enormously helped by this in my first two spiritual movements, and I've seen many other people who are very helped by studying a spiritual teaching. But there comes a point for most of us where that isn't quite enough for us. We sense there has to be something more. We sense that it has to be possible for me to know what's real and unreal. And so how do we deal with that question? What is real and unreal? And to me, the practical approach here is to realize. I've talked about this in several other videos. We can realize that the mind has certain limitations. The mind has the ability to become a self-referential, self-validating system. In other words, it's a closed system where the mind loses contact with anything outside itself. You can see people in mental institutions who are delusional, who have lost touch with reality, as we often say. They can't function. And of course, we want to avoid that as spiritual people, so we want to take a more gradual approach and realize that it is possible to start becoming aware that the mind has this ability. In a sense, I think I was always aware of this, but I couldn't put words on it as a child and a young man. And I have met many other spiritual people who had that same sense. And for me, it was very simple. From when I was a young child, I had these intuitive, mystical, non-dual experiences. And many spiritual people I met have the same thing. And for me, these experiences demonstrated that there's a reality outside of my own mind. There's something outside of my own mind that's real. That's in fact more real than the way I normally look at life, reason about life, argue about life. And this was a very important frame of reference. But it really became very, very useful to me when I had this concept, when I got this concept that the mind can become a self-referential system. And this you can grasp by realizing that there's a certain state of mind that people go into, and you can see it in the world, where they can argue for or against any issue. You take classical example, does God exist? Going back hundreds of years, there are people who have come up with these arguments why God must exist. And then there are atheists who have sought to invalidate those arguments and come up with their own arguments for why God does not have to exist. And you can see that the religious people are absolutely convinced that their arguments are real, and the atheists are equally convinced that their arguments are real. And for me, when I looked at this, even when I was a teenager and I started looking at this, I thought, but they can't both be right. They have opposite viewpoints. But when I realized that mind can become a self-referential system, I could take this one step further, because now I could ask, what if none of them are right? What if none of them have the ultimate understanding of the issue? It isn't really a matter of one being right and the other being wrong. It's just that there's more to understand about the issue than what either side has seen. And this is what you can come to understand. Even with the mind, I mean, even with the rational mind, you can come to see that maybe the rational mind has certain limitations. Because maybe the rational mind is so good at arguing for or against a certain viewpoint, but it can't really come up with any final argument. That's why, after hundreds of years, you still have people convinced that God doesn't exist and people convinced that God does exist, based on argumentation. So you can actually come to realize, at least intuitively, that you're never going to settle the issue of what's real and unreal through argumentation. You cannot simply use the rational, intellectual, linear mind to define what's absolutely real and what's absolutely unreal. Because if this mind could have done so, it should have happened a long time ago. There have been a lot of smart people in the world, a lot of smart philosophers. Somebody should have come up with this ultimate rational argument. Now, of course, a lot of people think they have come up with the ultimate, but it hasn't convinced everybody. So you can use that, or at least I use that, to realize there must be a limitation to this process, the mind, the rational argumentative mind. And after I started thinking about this, that was when I received these teachings from the Ascended Masters about the duality consciousness. And this was revolutionary for me, because I realized that there is a certain level of consciousness that we might consider neutral. And it's where we have a certain sense that we're connected to something outside our own minds. But we don't have a very strong sense of what we're connected to. We just intuitively sense we're connected. And so we can go two ways from that neutral point. We can go up towards higher levels of consciousness where we experience a deeper and deeper connection and we become more aware of what we're connected to. Or we can go down from that point. And when we go down from that point, we go into what I call the consciousness of separation, where now we become convinced and we actually experience that we are separate beings. We live in a separate world. We are separated from any kind of source, any kind of God beyond the world. We are separated from other people. So that's why you have so much conflict in the world, because most people on earth are in this state of separation. They see themselves as in opposition to, in conflict with other people. You see what's going on in the Middle East right now. And it's just one among many examples. So how do people then go into this separation? How do they convince themselves that they really are separate beings? They do this by using the duality consciousness. And in the duality consciousness, there are always two opposites. The pairs, as the Buddha called it. There's one opposite, one extreme there, one extreme there. And so, classical example, capitalism, communism. Two dualistic polarities. And then on top of this definition of the two polarities, there's a value judgment. One is right, one is wrong, one is good, one is evil. And once you go into this state of mind where you are reasoning this way, and the rational intellectual mind is very good at reasoning this way, but it can also see the limitations of this state of mind. But once you go into this state of mind, you think that your dualistic polarity is absolutely real. This is the ultimate reality. And it's not even that you think it, you experience it. But why do you experience it? Because you have excluded all evidence to the contrary. And there's two ways to exclude evidence. Two basic ways, at least. One is to just ignore it. You just ignore it. Another way is to reason that it's wrong or dangerous. You take a fundamentalist Christian, for example. They have a very peculiar interpretation of the Bible. They call it a literal interpretation, as if there was a literal interpretation. Either it's literal or it's an interpretation. But anyway, and they can convince themselves that this is right because anything that contradicts their interpretation, they label as being of the devil, and it's dangerous and they shouldn't think about it. So basically, by ignoring or by refusing to think about any contrary evidence, you can convince yourself that your viewpoint is real. Communism is absolutely real. When I was 18 years old and started university, I met some, this was back in the 70s, where there were still devoted Marxists. I met some devoted Marxists that were absolutely convinced that communism was real and it was inevitable that there would be a communist revolution in little old Denmark, as if there ever would be a revolution in Denmark, but that's besides the point. And they were convinced that this was the way it was. And of course, many other examples of this. So what we can do as spiritual people, we can say, have I had these mystical, intuitive experiences? Have I sensed that there is something that's real? And if I have, then what does it mean? And as I said, it means there is something outside of your own mind that is real. And that something, however you see it right now, that can become your frame of reference for questioning your mind and the worldview that you have. Now, there's a big obstacle here that I've experienced in myself, and I've seen it in many other people. When I was young, I had a very strong need to be validated, to feel that I was okay. Because as many spiritual people, I had grown up with a certain sense of inferiority complex, because I had this sense that there must be something, but nobody around me ever validated that sense. In fact, they all denied it, that there was anything beyond what we were told by church or state. And so many spiritual people, we have a certain inferiority complex. We have a need to feel validated. So what happens is we find a spiritual teaching or movement or guru, and now we feel that our spiritual beliefs have been validated. And now we don't want to have that sense of validation crumble by questioning, is the spiritual teaching we have really the highest possible spiritual teaching? Is it the highest way to look at life? And for many years, probably, I don't know, 20 years, maybe more, I was in this state of mind. I had a certain, well, I wasn't actually always in that state of mind, because I did find my first spiritual movement. I came to see the limitations of that. And then I gave that up. But then I found my second spiritual movement, and I thought, now I found the ultimate teaching. And so for many years, I was in this mode of, I only wanted to have that teaching validated. And my sense of that I was right after all, as a spiritual person, I wanted to have that validated. I didn't want to question it, because I didn't want to question that teaching. Because I couldn't bear if it was wrong. And so this can become a real stumbling block for us on a spiritual path. And I don't know what gets us out of this. I think for me it was a long process of gradually maturing, gradually becoming more and more conscious of my spiritual beliefs. But the real important aspect of it was I started having more and more of these intuitive experiences. And I actually started experiencing that there are beings in the spiritual realm who serve as our spiritual teachers. I call them the Ascended Masters. I've talked about them in other videos. And I started having more of a sense that of these beings. And what I sensed was that their consciousness was infinitely higher than my own, was much higher than what you can achieve here on earth while you're still in embodiment. And it was that sense, that allowed me to say, but I want that. I want that state of consciousness more than I want to hold on to my existing beliefs. In other words, it's like you have your existing beliefs, they're very important for you. But as part of the process, it's like the beliefs that you have, they can take you to a certain level of the spiritual path, a certain level of consciousness. And this is what I can see in myself. The beliefs I had was not that they were wrong or invalid, but they could only take me to a certain level. In order to go to a higher level, I had to look beyond them. I had to be willing to question certain things. And the only thing that could allow me enabled me to do that was I loved something more than my existing beliefs. There was something that was more important to me. Something that I just loved more than validating my existing beliefs. And so that's what led me into this cycle where I became willing to question my existing beliefs, my sense of reality. And what I started realizing is that we have to make a distinction between an argument or a teaching and the sense of reality. You again can look at two people. There's the atheist, they're convinced that their arguments are real, and there's the religious people who are convinced that their arguments are real. How can this be when the arguments are opposite? The arguments basically nullify each other. So how come one group is convinced that their arguments are real and the other that their arguments are real? And what I realized was that there's actually a difference between the argument or the teaching and the sense of reality. And this has to do with the duality consciousness. Because I've said in a previous video and several other videos that the Earth can be compared to a reality simulator. And a reality simulator has the purpose of giving us two types of experiences. There's an immersion experience and an awakening experience. In other words, first when we go into the reality simulator, we go into immersion. We go into this state of mind where we are convinced we live in a real world. And there are certain things in the world that don't respond to our consciousness. We just have to accept them, like the laws of nature or God's will. and this is the immersion experience. But part of this immersion experience is precisely what I've talked about with the duality consciousness. You take one dualistic extreme, you elevate that to the status of being the ultimate truth, and now you are absolutely sure that this is real. And you experience it as real. Because that's how you have this immersion experience. If it didn't seem real to you, it wouldn't really be an immersion experience. So, what is it that happens to us as spiritual people? It is that we have started questioning that immersion experience. And this, for many of us, probably happened in past lifetimes. So what happened is, there came a point where there was kind of two things that happened. First of all, we became tired of this human argumentation, always arguing for or against this or that viewpoint. We looked at these people who are arguing both sides of an issue, and we just got tired of it. We just had enough of it. We have saturated with that experience of defining reality. But what also happened is we started having these intuitive experiences that there's something outside of our own minds that's real. And that meant we now started, we may not have been conscious of it, but we started questioning our sense of reality. Is what I have sensed as reality, is it really real? Or is there something outside more than my sense of reality? And this is really, to me, what the spiritual path is all about, you could say. It is about questioning our sense of reality until we let go of all of these illusions that I have defined in these subconscious selves that we have. We shed these illusions, and then the core of our beings, the conscious you, begins to experience a reality that isn't created in our own minds, that isn't defined in our own minds. That, to me, is what spiritual growth is all about. You become more and more in touch with reality. Now, here comes then the really bad news. And the question is, as I've said in some of my other videos, does a spiritual teaching help you connect to reality, or does it hinder your connection to reality? And this is where you can see how many spiritual teachings and many spiritual people, they get into a dead end. They get into a quagmire. Because they accept a certain outer teaching, and they accept that this must be the ultimate teaching, therefore we don't need to look beyond it. So this means now there's an upper limit to what you're willing to question. This must be real. So I don't want to question it. I don't need to question it. So now you have limited how high you can go in consciousness. And that means you're kind of in quicksand. You're intellectual, psychological, spiritual quicksand because you keep going over the same argument and you keep arguing within the same framework. And this is what I've tried to explain in some of my previous videos on non-duality, that some of these non-dual teachers, they are exactly doing this. They have accepted there is an ultimate truth, only Brahman is real, the world is an illusion. And now they must intellectually reason within that framework that you are a separate self, your existence as a separate self is unreal, your sense of self is unreal, everything you see in the world is just an appearance. Meaning nothing is real, only Brahman is real. They are saying nothing that has form is real because as soon as there's differentiation in form, you have duality. But as I've tried to explain, this is not duality. Differentiation is not duality. Duality is a state of mind, a very specific state of mind where you define these two extremes and you say one is real, one is unreal. So what I'm saying is there are spiritual teachings, and some of them claim to be very sophisticated, but they're based on this frame of mind, the dualistic state of consciousness. How can you tell if a teaching is based on that? Well, one indication is it claims to be the ultimate truth. It claims to have the ultimate truth. And this is what you'll see. These non-dual people, and you can see even some of the comments on some of my videos, that they insist they have the highest understanding. They have the ultimate truth. And the ultimate truth is everything you see is an appearance. The problem I have with that is that I have seen people, and I can sense it in myself because I had a period myself too where I can see now. I couldn't see it then, but I can see it now. I was doing this with my spiritual teaching. I was seeking to validate it by arguing within this framework where I had taken one dualistic extreme and said this is the ultimate reality. And I was stuck. And you see some of these non-dual people, it's like they're in quicksand, in mental quicksand. And you know what happens in quicksand, right? The more you struggle, the deeper you sink. And that's what happens. The more you intellectually struggle to validate your absolute truth, your ultimate truth, the deeper you sink. And what I've seen in some of these people is essentially they are depressed. Because if everything you see is an illusion, nothing matters. As I said in my last video, what's the purpose of life if nothing is real? So what's the alternative? Well, it's to realize one thing. The whole idea that only Brahman is real and the world is an illusion, this is not an experience. This is not based on experience. It's based on argumentation in the intellectual linear mind based on defining two dualistic extremes. One dualistic extreme is Brahman, the other dualistic extreme is the world. They won't agree with that, but this is how it actually is when you look at it neutrally from the outside. And the reality here is that Brahman is not a dualistic extreme and can never be. Only it can be in our minds, but then it isn't Brahman, then it isn't the creator, it isn't the ultimate reality. It's in the mind we have taken the concept of God or Brahman or the creator, and we have turned it into a dualistic polarity that has an opposite. This is what the duality consciousness does. And it can take anything, whether it's the concept of God or Brahman or reality, it can turn it into a dualistic polarity that has an opposite. In reality, there is no opposite. Okay? So how do we explain this? Well, what is an intuitive experience? What is it? What are you contacting when you're having an intuitive experience? Well, let me just explain this by stepping a little bit back. I've explained it in my video about how the world was created, but I'll give a brief summary here. And the question we can ask ourselves is God stupid? Just consider that question. Is God stupid? So here you have the creator who decides to create a world that has form. The creator decides to create self-aware extensions of itself, send them into this world of form, and give them free will. They can do whatever they want with that free will. Was God stupid for doing this? I mean, look at the quagmire on earth. Look at what people have done with their free will, all the suffering, all the way they're harming each other, harming themselves. Was God stupid for allowing this to happen? Didn't God foresee this? And the reality is, yes, the Creator did foresee that this could happen. So what did the Creator do? You have, in Buddhism, you have the concept of the Buddha nature, which is in everything. You have the concept in Hinduism of the Atman, which is the one self. In Christianity, you have in the Gospel of John, it says, in the beginning was the Word, which actually should be the Logos. In the beginning was the Logos was with God, the Logos was God, and without it was not anything made that was made. So what the Creator did was, before it created any form, it created a mind. We can call it the Buddhic mind or the Christ mind, the Christ consciousness. But it is the one undivided, indivisible mind. And everything that's differentiated was created out of that one mind. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that any form is unreal. It means that if you look at a form deeply enough, you can see the one mind behind the differentiated form. And it is this one mind that is our frame of reference for getting out of the quagmire of our own minds. You could call it the Christ consciousness or the Buddha nature, whatever you want to call it. But the Creator, as the basis of creation, as the basis of the differentiation into form, it created one mind. And when we have an intuitive experience that there's something outside our own mind, it is this one mind we're connecting to. But here comes the all-important differentiation that it took me 40 years to get. 40 years of studying spiritual teachings before I got this. When we have an intuitive experience, we are not experiencing an ultimate truth or an ultimate reality. Why? Because the purpose of that intuitive experience is not to catapult us instantly into ultimate reality, but to take us one step up in consciousness. That's why it's very helpful for me to realize that there is this staircase or ladder of levels of consciousness that are possible on Earth. There are 144 levels of consciousness. And so, what I've said before is we start at the 48th level of consciousness, where we have some intuitive sense that we are connected to something outside our own minds. And then we can go up from there, or we can go down into the lower levels of consciousness. But for each level of consciousness, there is a specific expression of the one mind. And what is the purpose of that expression? It is to help us see through the illusion of that level of consciousness. In other words, for each level of the 144 levels of consciousness, there's a specific illusion that keeps us tied at that level. But the escape from that illusion is the one mind, which can give us the insight that shatters that particular illusion. But this doesn't mean we are free from all illusions. It just means we have taken the next step up. And that is very, very important to realize. Because you see so many people out there, they have a peak experience, a powerful intuitive experience. Some people, you see some videos out there, they had a powerful experience. I'm not in any way doubting or invalidating their experience. I understand that we can have very dramatic, I had some very dramatic experiences when I was young. And at the time, I also thought, oh, this is some ultimate experience. Now I'm awakened. There are some people that think they have one powerful experience like that. Now they are enlightened. Or other people say, I'm awakened because of one experience. What I'm saying is, you can go to the very lowest level of consciousness possible on Earth. And there's a specific illusion at that level that keeps you trapped at that level, because that illusion makes you think that the way you look at the world at that level is ultimate reality. It's real. That is how the world is. But you can still at that level, even though you are as trapped in illusion as you can possibly be on Earth, you can still contact the one mind. And it can help you overcome that illusion so you take the next step up. But be aware, this doesn't mean that you can catapult yourself from the lowest level to the highest level in one step. You go to the next level. And then you can overcome the illusion at that level. You go to the next again. Now, most spiritual people, when we find the spiritual path, we are not at these lower levels. We are already at the 48th level or above the 48th level. That's why we have this sense of connection that makes us realize there must be more to understand about life than what we were brought up to believe. And so we are higher than that level. But we are still not at the highest possible level. Most people who find the spiritual path are somewhere between the 48th and the 96th level of consciousness. So there are many steps up to the 144th level. I look back at myself when I was 18, and I think I was above the 48th level, but I was not anywhere near the 96th level. So for many years, I just took one small step at a time, and that's the way I've seen for most people. And it's actually counterproductive that these people who have this dramatic experience and then they interpret it like this is now some ultimate experience they've had. Because now they think, oh, I don't have to question a lot of things. I don't have to look at my psychology. I don't have to overcome these illusions and separate self because I'm awakened now. And, then you can use the intellectual, rational mind to validate this sense that you are awakened. And again, you can go into this argumentation, endless argumentation. Okay, so I have basically, what I've done so far is I tried to set a foundation. So now I'm going to make a jump. What is real and what is unreal? Well, as a working definition, as a starting definition, let's say that which is defined and created inside our own minds is not ultimately real. In order to connect to reality, we have to connect to something outside our own minds. So this is a working definition. What we have to avoid doing now is to use the dualistic mind to say, oh, but that means whatever I connect to outside of my own mind, that's now the ultimate reality. No, it's not. What you connect to outside of your own mind is the next step up from your current level of consciousness. You're right now somewhere on that scale of the 144 levels. You're not going to connect to some ultimate reality. You're not going to suddenly be able to grasp or understand or even experience some ultimate reality. You can experience something that's a step up. You can sometimes have experience that's more than one step up, but in general, it's much more constructive to say, okay, I've seen something that's the next step up. Let me look at the illusion I need to overcome at my current level, and then take that next step. And so what I'm saying is that when you realize this, that there's a gradual staircase that leads to higher and higher levels of awareness of reality, of a reality outside your own mind, then you can take a more humble approach. You can take a look at yourself and you can say, okay, I see that I have a separate self that wants something ultimate. It wants to have the ultimate truth, the ultimate spiritual teaching, the ultimate spiritual experience. But this is just a separate self. This is just part of the ego that wants to be special, that wants to be validated, wants to be better than others. And if you want to be better than others, it's obviously dualistic. It's relative, it's comparative to others. I am better than others. This is classic duality, the value judgment. So this whole concept, my second spiritual movement, which I was in for 15 years, everybody was believing we have the highest spiritual teaching on the planet. At the time, I wasn't aware, but I have become aware later. There are dozens of groups that think they have the highest spiritual teaching on the planet. They can't all be right, right? So maybe none of them are right, because maybe there is no ultimate spiritual teaching that can be brought forth on Earth. Why? Because this is an unnatural planet, as I've explained in some of my other videos. It has a very low level of collective consciousness, which is demonstrated by the way people treat each other, and it has a very high density of matter. Matter is very dense. So it's prudent, it's realistic, it's necessary at a certain stage to realize we are in embodiment on a low planet. And the whole idea that we, from this low planet, we could recognize ultimate reality, it's just not realistic. It's just this superiority complex that makes us believe this. So what we can say is, realistically, is if we want to know ultimate reality, we need to get out of here. And the process for getting out of here is raising our consciousness, shedding the illusions at the 144 levels until we can ascend from Earth. We graduate from schoolroom Earth, we graduate from the reality simulator, and we become ascended masters by mastering our own minds. Then we can start talking about ultimate reality and recognizing ultimate reality. It's really, I mean, it's just nonsensical to think that we who are in embodiment can recognize ultimate reality. I mean, I've been on the spiritual path for 47 years. I've studied many spiritual teachings. I practiced spiritual techniques until I was blue in the face. And I had a long phase where I thought, yes, I'm getting there. I'm understanding more and more. I really have the ultimate teaching. But what has helped me just give that up is my experience of contacting my higher self and the Ascended Masters, especially the Ascended Masters. Because when you experience an Ascended Master, and this is an experience all people can have, but when you experience an Ascended Master, you experience that they just have a fundamentally, qualitatively higher level of consciousness than I have. And how can I grasp that level of consciousness? How can I grasp the level of consciousness they have? And it's like, imagine you were born inside a bunker that only has these small holes that you're looking out through. But you're looking out there and you hear somebody say, "Hello, is anybody in there?" And you say, "Yeah, who is it?" And then you realize there's a person outside the bunker. How could you, from inside the bunker, get the full perspective of what the person sees outside that bunker? You may be able to understand various things, and the person may be able to describe it to you. But until you're outside the bunker and you're looking around, do you really get the perspective of what the world is like outside the bunker? And it's the same here. Until you ascend, you will not really grasp what it's like to be ascended and what the world looks like when you are ascended. So why do we have this desire for the ultimate truth, the ultimate reality? Because our egos need validation. It's like I talked about in one of my breakthrough videos about the compensation games. When we go into separation, we experience we are incomplete. We want to compensate for this by using the duality consciousness to raise ourselves up to be so special. And we can do this with the spiritual teaching. I did this for the first many years on the spiritual path. And again, if people need that experience, I don't have a problem with it. But I came to a point where I'd had enough of it. I just saw the vanity of it, And I met other spiritual people who've gone through the same. We just see the vanity of it. We say, I want more than this. I want more than what my own mind can come up with. And that's when you contact a greater mind that is ascended, that's outside of this. And so, you know, ultimate reality can only be experienced, is my point. But we can say certain things about ultimate reality. And I've explained this in my video about how the world was created, that the world is created in stages, in layers. There are previous spheres that were created first, and we are in a later sphere. And you can say that what was created, the mental images that were created inside the separate mind, inside the dualistic mind, that's unreal. So we need to connect to something that wasn't created inside our own minds, and that is reality compared to what was created by our own minds. But of course, what we connect to on a planet like Earth is the spiritual realm. But it's the spiritual realm that's right above us in vibration. But there are other levels of the spiritual realm that go higher and higher. So if you want to talk about something that's ultimately real, it can only be the creator who created our world of form. That's what's ultimately real for us. But even there's something beyond the creator, and that's even a more ultimate reality. But can we fathom this from planet Earth? No, we can understand intellectually that there is something. And it was valuable for me to have the intellectual understanding, but I don't fancy myself of thinking that I can really grasp it. I can understand that there are layers of reality that we go up to, and that this reality that's higher than Earth, it cannot be described by words. There is no spiritual teaching you could come up with in words that could describe this ultimate reality. And that's why I think it's prudent to realize that it's much better to give up the whole idea of an ultimate reality and realize that what we really need is to connect to this, as I said, the one mind, the Christ consciousness, the Buddha nature, that can help us see the illusion we're dealing with at our present level of consciousness and overcome that illusion. Then we connect to the next level of the one mind that takes us above the next illusion. And then we keep going up until we graduate from Earth and we ascend. Then we have a much higher experience of reality. And so, can I summarize this? Yeah. Okay. I've said there we can compare Earth to a reality simulator. And so you can say that we are living inside a simulation. But it doesn't mean that everything we experience is unreal, because there is a device, there is a simulator. It was created by somebody. It was programmed to give us certain experiences. And the beings who programmed this were the Ascended Masters. They were the ones who created Earth. And so we can say that there is certain aspects of what we experience that are real. I mean, there is a planet. It has certain natural laws that make it function. There's a certain predictability, but there's also constant change. So there's nothing that's unchanging, but there is something there that's real. And we can come to gradually understand more and more about the environment we are in. And science can help us do this, and spiritual teachings, validated by intuitive experiences, can help us understand this. When I was 18 years old, I can see I had a much lower understanding of the world I'm in and of my own mind and how the mind works than I have today. So yes, you can increase your understanding. But I also have come to realize that I don't have the ultimate understanding, and I never will as long as I'm in embodiment. But how do I increase my understanding so I can graduate from the reality simulator and exit the simulator? By increasing my sense of connection to that which is outside the simulator, outside my own mind. And that is my higher self and the Ascended Masters, who are the universal spiritual teachers for humankind. So you can say that which is outside my own mind, that is real. It may not be an ultimate reality if you, with ultimate reality, want to say that only Brahman or only the Creator is ultimately real. Yeah, I would say that, but I would also say, let's not try and put words on ultimate reality, because every time we do, we just get ourselves further and further into the quagmire. So in other words, we go back to what I said in my last video. There was a spiritual teacher who said, the ultimate truth is that everything you see is an appearance. And you could say that in the duality consciousness, everything we see is an appearance. But it is possible to use that one mind, the Christ consciousness, the Buddha nature, to connect to something that is outside the duality mind. And that is real. It has reality to it. Now, as I said, there are layers to that reality, layers of the spiritual realm that reach higher and higher. So if you want to use the mind, the rational mind, you can say, yes, well, that means that even the ascended masters right above us, they are not ultimately real. Maybe they are just an appearance also. And again, I've said, we have to be really careful about not thinking everything is an experience, because it's just quicksand. I mean, it just leads to depression. So we have to say they are at least more real than what we see from inside the duality consciousness. So let's hold on to that. You know, if you are in quicksand, how are you going to get out? The more you trash around, the deeper you go. But if somebody throws you a rope, you can grab onto that rope and you can use it to pull yourself gradually above the quicksand. So whether the ascended masters are ultimately real or not, they are more real than what we see in the quicksand. So they have lowered a rope, so let's grab onto that and use that one mind to pull ourselves above the quicksand. And when we are above the quicksand, which is the duality consciousness, we're standing on firm ground, the rock of Christ, as Jesus expressed it, or the Buddha nature, then we have a different perspective. Then we can start reevaluating what's ultimately real, what's more real than what you experience now. But still, as I'm saying, until we ascend, I don't think we will be able to fathom ultimate reality. I certainly have no ambition of being the one who can define what's ultimate reality, because I recognize that I am an embodiment on a very dense planet, and there's a limit to what my mind can fathom. And, you know, you might recall that there was a Greek philosopher called Socrates who said he was the wisest man in Athens because he was the only man who realized that there was something he didn't know. And I think it's prudent for us as spiritual people to adopt that mindset. There is more to know about reality than what we can fathom right now, and that what we will ever be able to fathom as long as we're in embodiment on this very dense planet. So I hope this has been helpful to you. I wish I'd seen this video 20, 30 years ago, because I think it would have helped me avoid some of these pitfalls that I was in. But maybe I needed to be in those pitfalls to have that experience. So I hope you can get something out of it, that you can get out of the quicksand faster than I did.